So I live in a suburb in New England where really the houses are rather close together, and my backyard only just consists of about a tenth of an acre. It's in this setting that in some ways we see, I think, a lot more rabbits and other rodents than you may in a rural setting, because there's enough land, there's enough habitat for rabbits, chipmunks, squirrels, birds, but there's not enough habitat for their predators. And so in some ways, I think per amount of space, we end up seeing a lot more rabbits and some of the destruction that they can cause than, let's say, if you're out in a rural space where you may have a higher ratio of predators per these the rabbits and squirrels and such. So even in my small yard of less than a tenth of an acre, there are times when I may see 4 rabbits in one space eating vegetation, my grass, various things that are left unprotected. So I've been here for about 7 years, and I've noticed that things that have worked at the beginning, they're not working anymore. And so there are things that are deterrents that are not necessarily foolproof but may work for a couple years. And then some garden sites, websites, you may even notice these little stakes of pure garlic oil. And you just kind of plant them in your various beds or large planters, and that actually worked too. And it just smelled like very intense garlic, and that's really what it was, just garlic oil concentrated. And that worked for a couple years, but then after a while it stopped working. My neighbors also recommended these items. So this one is called rabbit's gram, and I tried this, and it said that you can use it every 30 to 45 days, and I was really desperate because the rabbits were eating all my new perennials that I just planted, and it did work for about 2 weeks, and then no more. And so if you can tell, it's $40, and for it to work just for 2 weeks in a single bed, it just was not cost effective. So after trying this out 2 times, I couldn't do this anymore. But if you're in a situation where you have just a couple of pots where you're thinking, oh, I really want to protect these, or a couple plants I really want to salvage, but you don't have a big space, and you're just really focused on just saving a few plants, this may not be a bad idea. You have this, but you also have something like, this kind of spray repels all. Some smell worse than others. This not only repels animals, but I think it repels humans too. It smelled terribly. So I would ask before you ask or test it out before you buy it, if that's an issue. But these items, the pro is that it's not, you can't see it. It's not like a fence or some type of a visual barrier. So if that's important to you in your yard, they can work for that purpose. But again, it's rather limited. You do have to reapply it. It can smell, and depending on how much space you are trying to protect, it can become quite expensive. The next category is fencing or physical barriers. If I were in a rural setting and I started from scratch and I had all the space in the world, I would do the full fence of digging down at least 6 inches, getting fencing that's at least 3 feet high off the ground, protecting my entire vegetable bed, and just having a large dedicated space for flowers and vegetables. But being in a suburban, urban setting, that's just not feasible, because again, the space is small, you're sharing it with your kids, with the rest of the family, you're trying to eat here too, and so it's really, you're trying to multitask a small space. And so to fence off such a large area is not feasible. So the other ways that we went around and trying to prevent the rabbits, let me show you. There's not much in this bed. It's still early May in New England, but the perennials are popping up. And what I did for the first time this year was I put this fence in, and it's specifically, it's meant for rabbits. And you can tell that it's tighter, much closer together on the bottom, and then it spreads apart. And when I first saw it, I was a bit skeptical, but it actually has worked out really well in preventing them from coming in. Now, what I did was, rabbits are able to do a little bit of digging as well. So instead of digging all the way down, what I did was I used these long, I think these are 6-inch stakes, and I put them down. I'll demonstrate. And I just put it all the way down so that it caused an extra level of barrier that's more difficult for them to dig underneath, as well as making sure that there's no way that they can crawl underneath here. So it really helped minimize any damage. And so plants that had been damaged, I'm starting to see grow back. One thing that's helpful about having a fence that's not too tall is you can climb over it without needing a gate. Many years I had been able to plant in this bed without any issues. I was able to deter the rabbits with simply planting garlic, some marigold, and then using those garlic pellets. But starting about a year or two ago, I started noticing that the plants were just being attacked, and it was just completely eaten down to a nubbin. And what was really kind of comical was, and frustrating, was that I noticed that the very plants that were supposed to deter the rabbits, which are the garlic plants all the way on the edge, that they were eaten. So I came out maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the garlic had been eaten down to a nubbin to the very, very bottom. And so I put this fence in, and I know the fence is working because the garlic plants are now really thriving, and the rabbits are not going in and eating it. Height, I think, to me has been one of the most effective, because it's just they can't jump past the 2 feet here. I read that some rabbits can jump up to 3 feet, but the fat rabbits we have in our backyard, they're maxing at 2 feet. And so there are 3 ways that we elevated the space. So this pot is about 18 inches from ground to the rim. And in the past, again, this was perfectly fine height. They actually didn't want to jump this, but now I think they're getting more daring. And so what I noticed was, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a sugar snap pea that had been snapped off here right at the edge, and all of them, this one here too, and this one here too. And so decided, okay, so they're getting a little bit more daring. I need to protect them. So I measured out the difference plus a few more inches so that I can have it go in, and then I put this in a few days ago, and now it's allowing, for example, these to grow without being bothered by the rabbits. With this huge pot, we struggled to elevate it with, again, various blocks, slabs that we had just lying around. And again, this one is now at least 24 inches tall, and really excited to see that these are not being eaten. Now, one thing to consider though is sometimes I'll come here even when it's at this height, and I'll see that an animal has dug a hole here, for example, but the plants are not touched, or maybe there'll be one area where it's been nibbled, and I think initially I'll think, oh no, a rabbit got in, but in the past, I know from experience that when rabbits do get in, they just wipe out the entire pot of plants. So everything would have been down to a nubbin if a rabbit really got in here. So when I see that it's only just a hole here or just one plant, then it's most likely a squirrel looking for its acorns. And squirrels can be frustrating because they're making holes, and so it can cause some damage, but not nearly as much as a rabbit. So it's not wiping out the entire pot of plants. Or chipmunk, because chipmunks can climb up almost up anything, and so they're not as plentiful here as the rabbits, but we do have a couple of them, and so those, I'm not quite sure how to stop them, but again, they don't do nearly as much damage as a rabbit, so I just let them be. And then my newest addition to the yard is this raised bed. So at this point, had I done it from the beginning, I probably would not have put a raised bed at this lower level on the right, the stone raised bed, though it's beautiful and I really enjoyed it for a few years. Now I have to put a fence around it or figure out a way to further elevate the walls in the future to prevent the rabbits. With these new raised beds, this one is 24 inches tall, and you can actually make it even higher by putting more of them on top of each other. But for me here, 24 inches is shown to be enough, but I guess if they become even more daring, I might add on another slab on top. So a couple of other thoughts in trying to deter rabbits from your flower beds and vegetable beds. You want to make sure that it is far enough away that they're unable to jump on, let's say, a chair or a deck and then into your raised bed or into your raised pot. Because although they can jump 2 to 3 feet vertically, they can actually jump horizontally much more than that, over 5 feet. So let's say you have a beautiful raised bed, but you have it close to a deck, then they can easily get onto the deck and into your raised bed, which one of my neighbors had that experience too. He has a raised bed that's quite high, but he found a rabbit's nest towards the end of the season, and we suspect it's because the raised bed was close to his deck, and they got onto the deck and into his raised bed. Another thing to consider is that the rabbits generally, they don't like being in places where there's a lot of traffic, whether it be vehicular traffic or human traffic. And so a friend of mine, she has her raised bed actually in her front yard. And in her front yard, there are a lot of people walking back and forth. There are a lot of cars going back and forth. So she doesn't have any problems with rabbits. She does have problems with pedestrians picking from her raised bed, but no rabbits. And so that's another way. If you have a setting where there are a lot of people and cars, you might want to consider doing some of your plantings more in the front yard than, let's say, in your backyard. I hope you find this helpful. Although rabbits and maybe other animals can sometimes be quite bothersome, they can also just be a beautiful part of the nature around you, and it's just trying to figure out a way to live together and work together, and so that they eat things that you want them to eat, but not necessarily things that you want to eat yourself or see yourself. All right, so I hope this helps, and happy gardening to you all.